I gotta find a peace in peace. I had to find a peace. Tell me it's supposed to be. When you take it out of same book, I can't keep free. Can't keep on dreaming. That's something I regret. There's a light I'm trying to find. I wish you were strong enough to break my heart, break my heart. Come on, baby, break my heart. Only you can save me. There's a light we try to find. I wish you were strong enough to break my heart. I can't do you wrong enough to tear this all apart. I wish you were strong enough to break my heart. Go party on me, I'm so close to you. I'm something, honey, I want to do. You move so slowly, I smile, shell. The ones that know me, hanging out in somewhere. I'll be fast like you, baby, away from me too. I'm not built for speed, give it up, give it everything, yeah. Take me to bed, who's gonna be far right? I'm used to me, it's another thing, baby, I just be down. Don't tell them kids they so to let them out, say, it's not my business, on you, my face. I'll be fast like you, maybe you'll wait for me too. I'm not good for speed, give it all, get my everything, give it everything. God's feet, travel with hope in our mind. Lose rain, the sky and the window we got. Wild sea, we are all strangers in this land. No map, no promise but the light ahead. Rolling into the great unknown. Every step leads away from home. New star, so bright on the edge of the night. One spark, and the world begins again. Rolling into the great unknown. Every step leads away from home. Rolling into the great unknown. Every step leads away from home. Rolling into the great unknown. Every step leads away from home. Words wrapped in whispers, so they trapped up in my head. Sounds they're so blurry. Oh, I wonder what they said. Feelings they're so tender. Gotta handle them with care. I know I'm stronger than you. Will it take a while? Am I holding on for too long? Will it take a while? Am I holding on for too long? Sing just to feel it, play till I heal it. Sing just to feel it. Oh, I know it's getting better. Oh, it's getting better. Sing just to feel it. Fading or festering, is it simmering down, down, down? Pieces fall into places only make sense from far, far, far. It's like a wildfire, I can't contain it. Is there an option where I even take it? Will it take a while? Am I holding on for too long? Will it take a while? Am I holding on for too long. Sing just to feel it, play till I heal it. Sing just to feel it. Oh, I know it's getting better. I know it's getting better. Sing just to feel it. Oh, it's true. There's no other but you. Shining over you. Only you. Highest you. Always you. It's true. There's no other but you. Shining over you. Only you. Always you. Oh, it's true. Sing just to feel it, wait till I heal it. Sing to feel it, sing to feel it, wait till I heal it. Right. Feel it. Right. Good evening. How are we for sound? All good at the back? Fantastic. Fantastic. Folk, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Steve Hobbs. I'm the Vice Chair of the Kloof Conservancy and the convener of the Greater Ingwe Escarpment project that I'll talk to very briefly before we introduce our speaker. And also the sort of convener or facilitator of what has become known as the Greater Ingwe Escarpment Archaeology Interest Group. And we have the pleasure this evening of hosting this event on behalf of the KZN Archaeology Society. And I'm going to be introducing you shortly to Gavin Whitelaw, a prominent name in archaeological circles, certainly in the country. I don't know, Gavin, how wide your reputation goes beyond that, but certainly a well-published and active academic and researcher, archaeological researcher, and is attached here at the museum in Pietermaritzburg. I would like to just quickly reference Paolo Condotti, who is the convener or the chair of the Kloof Conservancy. Paolo, I did catch a glimpse of you somewhere. Paolo? Oh, up the back there. So Paolo is the driver and really the engine of the Kloof Conservancy, which is doing amazing work in the area. And this particular project, which I'm going to quickly talk you through, is really under his sort of initiative. And then I wanted to also quickly reference our host here at St. Mary's, Jonathan Manley. Jonathan, are you with us? Jonathan is the executive head. He's planning to be here, but I think he's got three consecutive events at the moment. Anyway, St. Mary's have quite generously given us the venue this evening, provided some teas and coffees and refreshments for us. So we're going to talk about the Ingwe Escarpment shortly, and St. Mary's is actually adjacent to the escarpment. In the east, the escarpment starts right here. And St. Mary's actually looks after about just short of a kilometer of the verge of the escarpment. And then there was one other person I wanted to reference, and he's not going to enjoy this. Len van Skalkwyk is quite a key person in our lives. I call him our resident archaeologist, or our tame art archaeologist. Len, where are you? Hey, some of you have met Len. Len talked with us in January, and Len, yeah, thank you. Len's been involved in setting this up. So we have the
the interest group, the Ingwe Archaeology Interest Group. Let's actually go to the next slide, if we may. Okay, let me start here. I'm going to orientate you. It might look a little bit strange there, but okay, so where are we? So we're sitting here at the moment. So that's sort of St. Mary's. This is the M13. This is Fields Hill on this side. Okay. And here we have the industrial area. I've lost the name. What are we talking about? Westmead, the Greater Westmead area. Okay, so just to orientate you, there's the golf course. You've got the SPCA sitting here, and quite a key reference point is this one, which is the Glenholme Gorge. Okay, here you've got the Tanglewood Farm. It's some of you will know the Walker family there. Then we come right along to the end. This is Haygarth and Avery Road, this sort of peninsula. And this is the Nkonka Conservation Area. I think we have Chris Harburn here this evening. He's the chair of the Nkonka Trust. So this project started with trying to integrate and have this area protected. We're now starting to move around to look at this area, the escarpment around the Stockville Basin. And that brings us right around here. So here we're now, so we're talking about Gillett's over here. And then this is Jan Smuts Avenue down here, right down to the end. And that's the viewpoint over there. Here we have the toll road and the N3. Okay, so the Stockville Basin is quite key. And again, you can see the escarpment, the vision for this integrated and protected area is the entire escarpment. Let me, before I talk the N3, here we've got the Giba Gorge. This is St. Heliers up here. It's the dam just up there on the M13, the St. Heliers Gorge, and then here you've got the Giba mountain bike park. So I think we're all familiar with this stretch of road as you come off at Shongweni here, and down here, and you've got those magnificent cliffs on your left if you're coming down. So so what we're going to be talking, Gerrit is going to be talking with us this evening around the Umhlatuzana Rock Shelter, which is situated right here, discovered in 1983 when they were building the N3. It was then excavated, I think, for the first time by Jonathan Kaplan in about 85, and so on. And I think Gerrit will take it from there. So I think probably the reason why we got to be sitting here this evening was that about 18 months ago, a couple of us were walking on the what we call the Matala Peace Road grasslands right there. And we stumbled on some pottery, and it looked authentic and quite striking. And so we needed to find an archaeologist, and we eventually were put on to Len van Skalkwyk, and it was sort of linked to the Umhlatuzana shelter. And so Len came down and dated this pottery as early Iron Age 750 pottery, about 1300 years ago. And that really caught our imagination. And so from there, we've started reading, looking around, and I think started to join the dots. And so what you have here in those red sites are where we have Iron Age and Stone Age finds of some sort. Most of them are citizen finds and unrecorded, but are in the process of being recorded. But obviously very, very well documented. But I want to just pop back down here. So, what I do need to say, this is the Greater Ingwe Escarpment is the host to the Umbilo headwater, the Umbilo River, and the Umhlatuzana River. So we've been looking at this from an environmental point of view and from an ecosystemic point of view. And as we've talked, we've sort of wondered, even way back then, I think that's how probably our early inhabitants, they wouldn't have used the words that we've used, but they operated and habited within a very deep sort of understanding of the ecosystems they were in. And so they had not only the two rivers that we talk about. So you've got the Umhlatuzana headwater, which is situated all in here, and the Umhlatuzana River flows under the M3 here, a couple of tributaries down towards Marion Hill Monastery. So in 1905, the Marion Hill hand axe was found by one of the Austrian brothers at Marion Hill, and that was actually written up as a scientific document in 1909 by a Austrian archaeologist, Obermeier, if I've got it right, a very prominent archaeologist, I think, who has an institute named after him. So that has also caught our imagination. And I want to at this stage just show you this, which some of you have seen. So this is another hand axe, an Achillean hand axe. Len has helped us just to understand it with a minimal sort of age of 400,000 years, probably to just over 1 million, depending. So this was found about 2 or 3 years ago by Jim Wallace, who is with us this evening, Jim and Val, who live in Elamaine Road. And we've subsequently become aware of 4 hand axes in this area. Now, I just mentioned that in that takes us back to the early Stone Age. This evening, we're not going to be in that space. We're going to be talking very much sort of in the early, in the middle, the MSA, the Middle Stone Age. But just quickly coming back, and I don't want to say much more about it. In fact, let's go to the next slide. It's a slight variation of this, the same slide. So over here, we also have some MSA lithics, stone tools that have been picked up there. We've had an archaeologist look at them. Gerrit Viola had a look at these. These were surface finds in the Glenholm Gorge there. They were found in 1983 by the SPCA manager at the time. So what we're in the process of doing is gathering a lot of this sort of material. We also have a very interesting stone lithic found at the end of last year by Richard Kluver, and Richard is with us this evening. And that is also an MSA lithic. It's actually a core that was found right there. Then we have a couple of Iron Age sort of sites with Iron Age pottery, really from that 750 period right through to sort of Bantu pottery, which would be, Len, if I've got it right, probably 1600 through to 1800, maybe 1500 to 1800, 1850. So what we're trying to do slowly is piece together some of the early habitation. And obviously a very big piece of that is the secrets of Umhlatuzana. Just to say that through Len, and I'm hoping with Gavin's assistance, we will later this year be engaging AMAFA, which is the National Heritage Association, Archaeological Heritage Association. And Len is feeling that there's a really good chance that we can have this entire escarpment registered as a sensitive archaeological area and allow us from a citizen science point of view, together with Len and Gavin and other folk, really become, involved in this sort of enterprise. And it's been really interesting. Our little archaeology interest group, as of this afternoon, had 174 members, and I'm hoping we might pick up one or two other members from here. So it really is a journey, and it's an environmental journey and it's an archaeological journey. So that's all I'm going to say at this stage, and I'm going to really now hand over to Gavin to introduce our guest speaker and maybe just say a word or two about the KZN Archaeological Society. So Gavin, thank you. Good to have you guys here. And yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks to all of you for hosting or inviting us to co-host this talk this evening. We really appreciate it. And it's lovely to see so many people here. We're not actually the KZN Archaeological Society. We're the KZN branch of the South African Archaeological Society. And you are welcome to join. It doesn't cost very much. I think it's less than 400 Rand a year. And you get access to two published professional journals on archaeology, the sort of premier Southern African archaeological journal. It's a South African Archaeological Bulletin, and three more popular publications called The Digging Stick, which you yourselves can actually write for if you wish, and get your findings and your ideas put into the Digging Stick. So you'll get those each year as a member of the South African Archaeological Society. It accepts joint memberships. There's special rates for students and pensioners and so on. So do look it up. It's got a website. It's really easy to download the membership form, and you just need to email that, fill out those details and email it to the secretary in Cape Town. And then you'll be put onto the list. We do have some brochures, I think, somewhere. Gilrain? Oh, brochures somewhere over here, so we can hand them out if you wish. And then just something slightly different. As Steve mentioned, I'm an archaeologist at the KwaZulu-Natal Museum in Pietermaritzburg for the next 3.5 months anyway. I'll be there. So we have the only archaeological department in the province. And it's been that way since 1972. And we also we have a really good archive of archaeological materials from the province. And that's not just the objects themselves, but it's the documentation that goes along with the objects. So it's a really good research resource. Gerrit himself has been there at times digging through the collections in the museum and revisiting old collections, Jonathan Kaplan's and even older ones in the past researchers have seen. So the museum is a place where research is an ongoing exercise. We also, just if you're interested, have sometimes produced books. We have 4 here for sale, if you wish. I've got 10 copies of each. 3 of them, the first 3 relate to the Sikar Valley in the Karoo from about 1770, the dates from 1770, tracking the Bushmen through the Sikal Valley from 1717 to about 1900. And looking at their story in that period, which is, of course, a time when the colonialization really just took over the entire valley. So it's quite a tragic tale in a way, and it stands as this kind of is a way in which it stands for South Africa in some ways, this experience of South Africa during this period. And then the fourth book, they're 150 Rand each, right? So if you buy all four, you can have them for 100 Rand each. So the fourth book is a book on Great Zimbabwe, the excavations of Tom Huffman at Great Zimbabwe in the 1970s. And he's written this up in a monograph. So you're welcome to come and get those books from us at the end. And we can hand out invoices, and you can pay electronically or cash now, as you wish. Okay, Gerrit. So Gerrit is an archaeologist he's an associate professor at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He did his undergraduate and his postgraduate work including his PhD at Leiden University. And then he moved to South Africa, where he did two postdocs. He had two postdoc periods, one at Wits University from 2009 to 2012, and the second at University of Johannesburg from 2012 to the end of 2012, I guess, to 2015. And his interests, just very briefly, cover the Middle and Later Stone Age of Southern Africa, Neanderthals in Europe, and he's also interested in hunting and foraging strategies of hunter-gatherers in the past. So that's briefly encapsulated, Leiden. I'd very much like you to come up and take over.
Let me get installed. Does this work? Keep it like this. Sorry. That works. Okay. So, thank you for all the kind words. I have realized that I did one very stupid thing in my PowerPoint. I did not include a map of the location of Umhlatuzana, but luckily that has been remedied by Steve just now. So you all know where the site is. So today I will just briefly give a background to the Middle and the Later Stone Age, because they are two periods for which South Africa is really famous. South Africa has a very special archaeological record that is quite unique in the entire world. Umhlatuzana is one of the sites that has yielded very important evidence for the development of the behavior of Homo sapiens, so of our own species. And then I'll try and talk quickly about two different topics. One is a recent research on weaponry, which you may have seen some news in the media of research findings of Professor Lombard of the University of Johannesburg, and I will add some experimental data that I have produced, and then I will go into the transition of the Middle to the Later Stone Age, because that is a period which Umhlatuzana preserves a very good archaeological record, and there are very few sites in South Africa that do. So that is why Umhlatuzana is such an important archaeological site, or at least I think, but I'm not completely impartial. So just to situate you quickly in the story of human evolution, this is a kind of a candelabra figure that shows the last 1 million years of human evolution, and where I will talk about the area in the red rectangle. So basically the last 300,000 years of our development, and then only the African story. So we'll leave the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans and other people in Asia. We'll just talk about African populations of humans. And as you can see in this rectangle, in the Middle Stone Age, we are dealing with different populations, maybe even different species of humans. So there is Homo sapiens, us, modern humans, but there are also populations that we like to call, or that we don't like to call, but we do call them archaic Homo sapiens. So they kind of look like Homo sapiens, but their anatomy is slightly different. And from recent genetic works, it seems that there are populations with different DNA. And then there is this recent discovery, this weird species discovered in 2015 by Professor Lee Berger, Homo naledi, which is a really small-brained and small-bodied hominin. When it was discovered, it was speculated that it might be about 2 million years old, and then when it was finally dated, it turned out to be surprisingly young, somewhere between 300,000 and 200,000, putting this species in the temporal range of the Middle Stone Age, which is spectacular. Now, I've been using the term Middle Stone Age too often already. What is it? Well, it's a period between 300,000 years ago and around 40 to 20,000 years ago, depending at which site you look at. It was produced by Homo sapiens and archaic Homo sapiens, and based on the date, maybe also by Homo naledi. Now, to my mind, age is not enough in itself to make a species responsible for part of the Middle Stone Age. We have to be able to show that these people made the characteristic stone tools that we associate with the Stone Age, because human fossils are super rare. We archaeologists, we navigate the past by looking at different kinds of stone tools. So you have these very beautiful hand axes. They are characteristic for the early Stone Age, which we won't talk about today. And then we have so-called prepared cores, where you see an example here of a prepared core and the flake that's been struck off it. And the interesting thing about prepared core technology is that you can control the shape of the flakes that you produce. So you can make oval flakes or pointed flakes or rectangular flakes. And that means that in the Middle Stone Age, humans can make a much greater variety of different forms of tools than they could before. And the only fossils that are associated with this kind of technology are basically large-brained humans, Homo sapiens here. But we also know this technique from Europe, where it's associated with Neanderthals, who also had super large brains. And so this leads us to think that you need to be quite intelligent to be able to operate this prepared core technology. Now, then, what is the later Stone Age? This is the period after the Middle Stone Age, but it's completely different. It's made by Homo sapiens only. It lasts from 40,000 years ago to basically historic times. And if you look at the archaeological record, we see behavior that's reminiscent of what we see ethnographically known hunter-gatherer societies do. Now, some have even made claims that the bone tools that you see on the right-hand side of this slide are kind of San material culture. I think we should be careful with making ethnic labels, putting ethnic labels on these materials, because the San, as we all know, are not kind of unchanging populations, but they have developed and they are dynamic communities that have changed a lot in the last 40,000 years. But anyway, look for Umhlatuzana. The thing that we have to look at are the stone tools, because unfortunately, in the older layers of the site, no animal bones are preserved. So we don't get these very cool. Can you see my? No, you can't see my pointer. Well, you see on the top very cool daggers made from warthog tusks and other very cool bone tools, or at least us archaeologists think they are cool. We don't find these at Umhlatuzana. We just find the stone tools. And the interesting thing is that stone tools in the later Stone Age become really, really small. So this is the finger of a colleague, Dr. Justin Pargeter, with a later Stone Age tool on top of it. So this is well, the most forceful illustration I know of showing how small some of these tools are. And for a long time, people thought the transition of the Middle to the later Stone Age, it represents kind of the locking in of modern complex human behaviors in human populations. But over the last few decades, we found out that that complex behaviors really all arise already during the Middle Stone Age. So I'm now going to show you a very complex map. Well, I'm not apparently. Here you see this is a map of Africa. Obviously, all the dots are archaeological sites, and then floating above them are differently colored bars. And these differently colored bars, they represent a time depth of behaviors that us archaeologists find interesting. So you can see that there are beads made of ostrich eggshell, and there are bone tools, and there's evidence for hafting. Well, doesn't matter. The main take-home message is the bars in southern Africa are very colorful. There's a lot of these special behaviors that have been found here, and they go back very, very far in time. So these complex behaviors are developing in southern Africa very early on. This is an older version of the graph. It's a bit simpler. On your left-hand side, you see on the horizontal axis time, and then on the vertical axis, basically a shopping list of behaviors that us archaeologists like to find. And the take-home message is these behaviors arise gradually in Africa. This is from a paper from the year 2000, and this paper really needed to be written because until that time there were still people that thought, published the idea that Homo sapiens anatomically evolves in Africa, but then complex, interesting behaviors, they really are only invented when they're in Europe, as if there's some kind of magic sauce that happens in Europe. And so in this paper, the revolution that wasn't to American colleagues, they basically show that's wrong. All the complex stuff is found earlier in Africa than outside Africa, with the exception maybe of figurative art. And on the map, there's another thing that I'll come back up, where we see that at least in some parts of the Middle Stone Age, stone tools are more than functional. They may take on cultural meanings, and we see the development of different regional styles. Now, some examples of these behaviors that us archaeologists are fascinated by. So in South Africa, we have early evidence for the intensive use of red ochre, a pigment which is red. But we also, and this is the most famous piece, many of you probably know it, we also get these pieces of red ochre that have been engraved with a kind of a cross-hatching pattern in this case. This is a piece of 70,000-year-old abstract art from Blombos Cave in the Western Cape. And the same site showed evidence for the early use of jewelry. So the site excavated by Professor Henshelwood of the University of the Witwatersrand, it shows really small snail shells, too small. They only contain kind of 1 gram of meat. So they're too small really to be gathering for food, but they're all perforated, and the perforations show facets of wear. So they seem to have been strung together as a necklace. The necklace on the top is a reconstruction. It's not, but these jewels are 70,000 years old, and this we think is very interesting, not because it shows that early modern humans in South Africa were vain. No, we think that it shows that people have a so-called theory of mind, so that people know what they look like, and they know that other people know what they look like, and they can try to manipulate their own image, like you might do picking out a specific outfit. If I wear, I don't know, a tailored suit and a tie, I make a different impression, and I have an idea in my mind about what your vision of me will be in your mind. And this is quite complex behavior. And so the the development of jewelry shows that these modern humans have it and that they try to manipulate their social roles. Now, another material, in addition to red ochre that's engraved, is ostrich eggshell, where you get at a site called Deep Clove in the Western Cape, the same pattern repeated for thousands and thousands of years. So that suggests that these patterns really have meaning, that it's not just arbitrary scratches. And another cool thing is that we see that the apertures of these ostrich eggs have round holes, and that's reminiscent of perforated ostrich eggs that we know from the Holocene, so from the recent history of South Africa, where these ostrich eggs are emptied and then used as water bottles like this. And it seems that maybe this is already happening in the later Stone Age. So people are maybe planning ahead, if they have to forage on a hot day in a dry area, that they bring their own water along. But another thing you can do with ostrich eggshell is you can make beads. And these beads have been made in African societies for tens of thousands of years. So we find them from the later part of the Middle Stone Age, and there are still communities that make them today. Now, the interesting thing about ostrich eggshell beads in the archaeological record is that Brian Stewart and colleagues have shown that ostrich eggshell beads are present at sites in Lesotho and KwaZulu-Natal where there are where ostriches are not endemic, right? The ecology is not fit for ostriches, so historically there probably weren't any ostriches there. And based on the geochemistry of these beads, they can show that some of them have been transported into the highlands of Lesotho for over 300 kilometers. So this suggests that from the later part of the Middle Stone Age onwards, you can see on the map the transport distances. But anyway, from the later part of the Middle Stone Age onwards, there are sort of social networks that span hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, which is a really interesting finding for how we envisage how integrated these human societies were. Because as you probably know, generally as ecologists, humans are present in super low population density as hunter-gatherers. So there may be only a few people per 100 square kilometers, right? So if you don't organize your social networks, you could walk around the landscape for years without actually ever meeting another person. And in the Middle Stone Age, we think that people are organizing social networks across basically the subcontinent. Now we get to Umhlatuzana Rock Shelter, where I failed to bring a map, but I give you a picture of the site during excavation. So it's quite a shallow rock shelter. It's underneath the N3. So the N3 is basically on top of the mountain that we are sort of digging under. As already introduced, it was discovered during the construction of the N3 highway, and 6 square meters was excavated in a rescue excavation by Jonathan Kaplan. And he showed that the site has a surprisingly long occupation sequence. So that's jargon for there's a lot of dirt, 2.5 meters of sediment, and it's full with stone tools, which we really like. But the original excavator had some suspicions about sediment disturbance. He thought that some layers had been mixed, that older and younger materials ended up in the same layer, which is annoying for archaeologists because then we can't really study human behavior. The site was studied by Professor Lombard, who concentrated on the lower parts of the sequence where this mixing problem is not present. And she has also provided optically stimulated luminescence date, a very complex word, but basically the number 70,000 on the poster, the announcement for today's function, that's from her dating. So it dates the date of burial of sand grains, and the lowest layers of the site are at least 70,000 years old. So this site shows a continuous record of human behavior in KwaZulu-Natal for the last 70,000 years. And then the final, so far, chapter in the history of the site are re-excavations by me in 2018 and 2019. And those are what I will mainly focus on today. It's important to mention that this kind of research is a team effort. So although I'm speaking, my lithic analyst, who's already been mentioned, Viola Schmid, was very important, as was a geoarchaeologist, Irini Sifo-Georgaki. So I'm presenting also on behalf of a lot of colleagues. Now, here you see what we archaeologists like to draw, namely a profile, so a vertical section through the layers of sand. On the right-hand side, the profile of my excavations. On the left-hand side, sorry, the profile of the rescue excavations in the 1980s. And as you can see, what we found in the right-hand profile kind of confirms what was already observed in the 1980s. So that's good. We're looking at the same thing. And then in the sort of colored bars on the side, you can see the different kind of techno-complexes. So the different ways of making stone tools that change throughout the sequence. Now, the first period I want to focus on is the so-called House and Spoor period, which is dated to between 65,000 and 60,000 years ago. Maybe it starts at some sites. The start is dated earlier, but in 2010, Professor Lombard published evidence for the use of some of the lithics from this House and Spoor period as arrowheads. So the House and Spoor is characterized by tiny semicircular lithics, and many of them in quartz, not the nicest material to net, but I'll get back to that. But many of them show signs of impact, where the stone was sort of stopped, was traveling at a high velocity and then stopped suddenly, and tiny flakes broke off. And the back end of these lithics, they show residues of glues, of prehistoric glues. So Professor Lombard interpreted these stones as kind of hafted arrows, as drawn in the picture, but she didn't know exactly in which orientation the segments were hafted. So on your left-hand side, you see some experimental replicas that she made of potential ways of hafting these arrows. And one of the things that I have tried to do is to look at which way of hafting lithics are the most efficient, which is important. Why? Well, I'll show you now based on a very complex graph. As I usually tell my students, this will not return at the exam, so feel free to kind of zone out. But the main thing is that as archaeologists, when we look at projectile weapons, we only have the stones, the stone tips. We don't have the shaft, so we don't often know whether a stone tip is made to tip a spear or an arrow or something else. And one of the approaches pioneered by Professor Lombard is to look at a uniform way of measuring stone tools called the tip cross-sectional area, and then looking at ethnographic comparison. So materials from recent communities where you know the use that a tip was put to. Now, on the left hand, on the left hand side of the graph, there are large bars. I wish I had a pointer, but I don't. Do we have a pointer? So you see this bar. This is the range of cross-sectional area values that thrusting spears from the ethnographic record have. So quite large. And then these are javelin tips. These are dart tips. arrow tips, poisoned arrow tips. Now, the interesting thing about these Hausen-Spoort lithics, like if you measure a tip cross-sectional area, for most types of stone point, it's easy, right? The pointed end, that's the front, and the wide end, that's the back. But for these weird semicircular segments, the tip cross-sectional area differs dependent on how you halve them, on how you orient them in the haft. And this is why in the rest of these bars, these are all archaeological sites, and there are minimum and maximum values. Here you see Umhlatuzana, so that if you use the maximum TCSA values, most of these segments fall in the range of ethnographic arrows, and a small part falls in the range of poisoned arrows. If you use the minimum size, then most are in the range comparable to ethnographically known poison arrows. Now, what did we do? We halved stone tools differently. So this would be kind of the maximum TCSA value, and this more the smaller one. And then we made a bunch of arrows, and we shot them into blocks of gelatin. I have a video clip. Let's see if this works. So we shot these arrows a lot of times on the same blocks of gelatin. We made the gelatin too thin so that the arrow can penetrate the block of gelatin, and we can pull the arrow through so we don't damage the point, and we can use the same arrow for multiple shots. And then we look at which hafting configuration penetrates this gelatin better. And that you can see in these graphs. The take-home message, let me see, I'm colorblind, I always have problems with this. So the orange dots are the diagonal arrows, and the blue dots are the transversal arrows. So these transversal arrows, they are the arrows where the TCSA is the maximum values. This is weird because the idea is the larger the TCSA, the more friction an arrow encounters when it hits a target. So it should penetrate less well than the diagonal arrows. What we think, but we're doing more experiments to look at this, is that actually this broad tip, it clears the way for the arrow shaft. So it reduces the amount of friction that the shaft that comes behind the lithic experiences. Anyway, the take-home message, we did a lot of series, and there, for most of them, there isn't even much overlap. These transversally hafted arrows are better. They penetrate blocks of gelatin. Obviously, a block of gelatin is still something else than like a bokkie. So, but it's much more animal friendly for our experiments. Anyway, so this shows that most of the arrowheads of Umhlatuzana, we should be looking at the maximum estimate of the tip cross-sectional area, and they fall in the range of normal arrows and not poisoned arrows. But then recently, Professor Lombard showed that some of the tips from the Kaplan excavation, they actually have residues, plant residues of poisonous plants adhering to them. So actually, people are already using poisoned arrows at 60,000 years ago at Umhlatuzana. And some of these specimens, they clearly are quite big. So this teaches us that the ethnographic record, it provides for us a sort of search template, but obviously in the last 60,000 years, a lot has changed. And so it's not a one-on-one comparison. So this is one of these kinds of complex behaviors that is that we see in the Middle Stone Age. And this, in addition to figurative art, is really the only thing that we don't know from Neanderthals. We do not know any bow and arrow or any projectile weaponry from Neanderthals, let alone the use of projectile weaponry combined with poison. So this shows that in the Middle Stone Age in South Africa, people are, well, they are very aware of the environment. They're efficient hunters. We already knew that. We now know that they are doing this with bow and arrow, and that they're also well aware of plant properties, not just the plants you can eat, but also what you can do with plants that you should not eat, um, which is really interesting, and another piece of the puzzle in our knowledge of the development of human behaviors. But now I want to move forward in time to the period between 40,000 and 20,000 years ago, the MSA-LSA transition. So what happens? Well, this is a stone point, which you saw on the announcement of today's function. It's from the Middle Stone Age. And then in the later Stone Age, people seem to start making, A, they make smaller stuff, and B, they put less emphasis on shaped stone tools and more emphasis on just producing a boatload of very small, sharp pieces of stone, often in quartz. While before, people used different stones like hornfels and sandstone. But the, the the layers of earth in which this transition takes place, these are the layers where the original excavator Jonathan Kaplan supposed that there might be a large-scale mixing of material, in which case we wouldn't be looking at a transitional layer. We would just be looking at a mix of older and newer stuff that had been accidentally ended up together. So in the profile, in this section of the earth layers, there is a sort of offset between darker sediments towards the cave wall and lighter sediments sort of coming in towards the valley. And the original hypothesis was that the lighter stuff had kind of slid down over the darker stuff and moved out towards the cave mouth. So then, say, layer 10 here would be as old as layer 2 here. And if you excavate them together, you get a mix of materials from different periods. So my excavation campaign really was aimed to look at what kind of drink is Umhlatuzana serving us up? How mixed or how layered is it? And we did this in multiple ways. So one of the ways is looking at the density of stone tools. And then you see a kind of a continuous orientation, more or less horizontal. So that suggests that there hasn't been the large scale movement down of stuff, because then you would see clearer offsets. What we also did is we looked at the sediments themselves in multiple ways. One of the ways is that we took sediment samples, each of these squares, and then we dried them in the lab and we classified them using the Munsell color scheme. This is a sort of semi-exact color scheme where every color under the sun has a specific code. 10.5 yellow, red 3 and stuff like that. And it turns out if you dry the sand from the profile, then the difference between the light and darker sediments kind of disappears. So what we think is that this color difference in our profile doesn't represent a depositional event, a change in how the material was laid down. No, it represents something that happens after deposition, namely the hydrology of the site, with water seeping in from the rock shelter wall and being more concentrated on the left-hand side than on the right-hand side. Now, if this holds, and I think it does, then that means that we can study the lithic materials from these layers for behavioral information, to understand what's happening to make a wholesale technological reorganization happen. But first, there is one other potential source of mixing. So another thing we did was we made thin sections. We basically put samples of the soil in a kind of wax, and then made very thin slices that you can look at under the microscope. And then you get slides like these. They look very weird, maybe, but what you can see is, for example, pieces of stone tool that have been sectioned. But there are also very many little round things that are labeled here as 3, and they are insect burrows. So perhaps there isn't large scale movement, but there is still maybe some small scale movement of stuff. Although there also seems material that's still in primary position that hasn't moved since it was deposited, labeled here in 1. Anyway, so with a bit of caution because of the influence of insects, which are mainly moving sand grains and not the lithics themselves, we can look at what happens. Well, one thing that happens, and this will be the really technical part of the talk, so I'll try and speed up so as not to bore you to death. You can see it's very silly to make colorful graphs when you're colorblind, but what you can see here is the different kinds of raw materials, so the different kinds of stones that are used in the different periods of time. So here on the horizontal axis, where's my dot? On the horizontal axis, that each spit, each layer of earth, this is deep, this is old, and this is young. And then you see the main periods of interest are the final MSA, where you see a lot of, I think it's green, hornfels. Hornfels is a beautiful rock, and it's a well knappable rock. I really like hornfels. People are also using sandstone. This is basically the stuff from the rock shelter wall. So nice and local. You can just have your stone tools where you're sitting. And then there is a increase through time in this lower blue part, which is quartz. Now, quartz is very difficult to nap because it's full of heterogeneous fractures and other stuff, but it's harder than hornfels and produces a nice sharp edge. And so the idea is that basically during the later Stone Age, people are only using quartz. And here you can see that in this sort of shaded area, there's kind of a transitional phase where quartz is really increasing a lot and hornfels is decreasing. Now, another raw material that we haven't identified from the excavated lithics, but we have found in one of these thin sections, in one of these slides through the earth, is called silkrete. This tool, this example is from a different site, but here you can see the cross section under the microscope. Now, silkrete is another good knapping stone, but its geological location is quite limited. So it's basically mainly found in the shaded area here. And so even at Umhlatuzana, we have some evidence for these long distance contacts, which I talked about with ostrich eggshell as well, but also some pieces of stone probably move hundreds of kilometers. Now, what are they doing with the stone tools? They make, as I say, tools. Another graph on the horizontal, this is old and this is young. So the take-home message here is that we've classified all the different shaped tools that people make in a different color. And in the later Stone Age, there are fewer of these bars, and there are less different colors represented. And in the Middle Stone Age, the final Middle Stone Age really shows a high emphasis on a variety of shaped tools. And then in the later Stone Age, what we mainly see is the production of modified blanks. It's basically a bit of a, as Trump would say, a nothing burger. It's a piece of stone where they maybe chip 1 or 2 flakes off, and splintered pieces, which are a kind of wedges, also not very nice to look at, but apparently very useful because they persist through time for a long time. So this is maybe nicer to look at than these graphs. This is what the MSA is. The Middle Stone Age shows prepared core technology which allows people to focus on shaped stone artifacts. And if you look not just at the beautiful stuff, but at the tiny flakes and chunks, you see the same thing. Again, a graph, sorry. Old is on your right-hand side and young on the left-hand side. Here what you see is that in this final Middle Stone Age, there is a huge peak in so-called shaping flakes. I mean, the name says it. These are what you produce while you're shaping a tool. These are characteristic flakes from shaping the edge in the shape you want it. And then the blue line shows what people are doing in the later Stone Age, which is called bipolar napping. And this bipolar napping sounds nice. It's basically you take an anvil, you take the stone you want to nap, and then you take a hammerstone and you basically bash the hell out of it. And it's a very nice way to quickly produce sharp things. In its most basic form, it doesn't allow you much control, but I'll come back a bit later. So in this is a sample of later Stone Age stones, and here what we see is, in jargon, most lithic technology was developed by French people. So you sometimes see some French words. So in the later Stone Age, people focus on debitage production. So that's the flakes that you produce, debitage. And they do this in this other material, this quartz, that is difficult to flake. So are people doing this LSA not just because they're reorganizing their technology, but they use a different stone and the stone doesn't allow for anything nicer? Well, that's not true, because in the lowest layers of Umhlatuzana, so these are the still bay layers of 70,000 years ago, Professor Lombard has studied these very beautiful serrated points. So it must be very frustrated to make those, but you can make quite beautiful stuff in quartz. So the shift to the later Stone Age is not dictated by the raw material. It's a technological choice. And the interesting thing is we do see some quartz also used in the Middle Stone Age, and so here this red rectangle, that it shows a very small quartz core, so the stone from which you produce flakes to make tools, and this one you can see it most clearly on the drawing. This is basically a Levallois core. This is the hallmark of prepared core technology. So this fits exactly in the Middle Stone Age. So you can use quartz to make Middle Stone Age technology, but people aren't doing so. Now, why is this? Well, my idea is, and this is in progress, but I'll bore you with it now anyway. So my idea is that in the later Stone Age, maybe there is a trade-off and the cultural significance of lithics may decrease. And then what you see is more how people are solving a teaching problem. How difficult is it to teach someone to nap? Now, and it turns out this may not be super difficult. So this is one of my favorite experiments, which I didn't do, but a British colleague, Kerry Shipton, who basically made his girlfriend nap him hand axes. This is, I mean, Valentine's Day is past, but it may be an idea for next year. Anyway, so he describes the experiment like that. The subject, the girlfriend of the author, knew nothing of stone tools, so they don't talk archaeology. This is, I guess, good for any healthy relationship. And so the subject was shown a pointy hand axe and asked to replicate it with no other verbal instructions. And then this is what is produced. And it doesn't look like much, but I mean, you can kind of see what they're trying to do. But the next stage is much more interesting. So after this, The author napped a hand axe, but no verbal instructions were provided. So he didn't talk to her. And then she had another go. So she'd just seen it done, but no teaching, no talking. And then this is what was produced. And this is actually a really good hand axe. I can't do it like this. I should probably have my girlfriend nap me some hand axes to show. But and so this experiment shows, to my mind, that some of the basics are, if you have a good tool stone and a good instructor, are not super difficult to master. And then you can focus more on making weird shapes in stone tools. But with quartz, because the napping is so unpredictable, this is less the case. So this is some of my own experiments, which I didn't do with my partner, but with a French lithicist called Morgan Roussel, and here he is doing bipolar napping of quartz. So you can see he's struck the core, which is on a stone anvil, and you can just see a tiny flake coming off. And then this is what he produced. Now, this was, especially for Morgan, a really frustrating and, for his hands, very bloody experiment. But what was interesting is that we realized that with just bipolar napping, with just using an anvil, we could not replicate the small dimensions of the later Stone Age stuff that we found in Umhlatuzana. So Morgan suggested that he could use a pair of wooden clamps and some string to kind of add stability to the core and kind of force or direct the force of the blow through the core. And then he did a better job. And so what we thought was that actually, once you have the technique down, it will be quite easy, or not easy, but straightforward to nap lithic. So you start with a bipolar split, and then there is some freehand, so just without the anvil, some preparation, then anvil assisted reduction, and then you finish for the smaller stuff with clamps. But it turns out, if we just let Morgan nap, that it's much more complex. There's not a straightforward order of operations, but it seems that the napping of quartz is more sort of a chess player who has an entire array of moves that he can flexibly combine based on the situation on the board, or in this case, the situation on the core. And what is more interesting is that we also see that there is sometimes unconscious flexibility. So basically, we made Morgan tell us what he was going to do. But sometimes when you look at the videos that we make, he says, I'm going to do A, and then actually what happens is B. And there is a video where I can try and show this.
Là, ça, normalement, ça devrait y aller. Voilà. Regarde.
So it doesn't look like much, but when you look at the things in slow motion, French lithicists, they have maybe over-analyzed these stone tools. But there are complex classifications of the gestures that are used to reduce lithics. And so what we think we see in this video is that the intention is just a straight blow, but when the core moves in the clamps, you see the hand a bit more sort of pulled back towards the body. We have some slow motion movies, but I won't bore you with that. But the idea is that the core moves in the clamps, and we think that basically, sort of unconsciously, the strategy is adapted. So this is what is now with a hip word called embodied cognition. So the realization that the cognition of this napping of lithics is not just in the brain, but it's in the interplay of stone, of hands, of the nervous system, of the senses, and the brain. And that makes it maybe not easy, but especially also not very easy to teach. It's not very easy to put into words what you should do with an unpredictable material like quartz, if sometimes you're doing stuff that's different from what you yourself are saying that you're doing. Anyway, so why is this happening? Why are people doing a wholesale reorganization of their stone tools, moving towards quartz? We think quartz is quite a local material, so we think that this represents a change in the way that they move across the landscape, they use the landscape. We also think that there is a trade-off, but we can't check this at Umhlatuzana, where people may be investing more energy in making these nice bone tools that you find at other sites like Border Cave, but that have decayed in Umhlatuzana. And if you look elsewhere in the world, this kind of a reorganization has the magnitude of an extinction level event, right? In Europe, you have Neanderthals making prepared core technology, and then there you get what we call in Europe the Upper Paleolithic with microlithic technology and blades, and this is made by a new species, by Homo sapiens. But as I said in the abstract for this talk, in South Africa, it's Homo sapiens all the way through. We have famous Homo sapiens fossils for example, Klasi's River that are older than 100,000 years ago. There's a famous skull and floors, but there are these Middle Stone Age assemblages are made by Homo sapiens, and the later Stone Age assemblages are made by Homo sapiens as well. And what's more interesting is that the transition is very diffuse. So here, another kind of graph, but now of my own design, which probably makes it worse. In gray, I have listed the latest dates for Middle Stone Age industries from a number of sites in the east of South Africa. So you see, for example, at the well, it didn't fit in my timeline, but Border Cave on the border of Swaziland and South Africa has the latest Middle Stone Age at 56,000 years ago, and then in red the earliest assemblages that we classify as LSA, and there you see Border Cave. They start making proper LSA at 44,000 years ago. And so between 56,000 years ago and 44,000 years ago, there are transitional assemblages. Now, there are some other sites. Umhlatuzana, the latest MSA is probably just after 40,000 years ago, and the earliest proper later Stone Age is older than 32,000 years ago. We're working on better dates, so this will be continued. But what's interesting is that, for example, Sohonghong and Medicane, the earliest later Stone Age that we find is quite young. 27,000 at Medicane in Lesotho and 24,000 in Sohonghong. What's even more interesting is that Sibebe, which is in Swaziland, quite close to Border Cave, they are still making Middle Stone Age artifacts 27,000 years ago. While just down the road at Border Cave, they've been making later Stone Age stuff for thousands of years. So this suggests that the later Stone Age doesn't bring super big adaptive advantages. Otherwise, everyone would have adopted it really quickly. But this weird long-term transition from Middle to later Stone Age makes it quite difficult to interpret. But interpret is what I will do, or attempt. But there is one other interesting thing in Umhlatuzana. So first, the transition takes up a thinner zone across the stratigraphy, so a thinner layer of Earth than we originally thought. So it may be a bit more rapid than we originally thought. But this transition is not final, because in the middle of the later Stone Age assemblages that we excavated, there is the so-called P3 phase, where some elements that seem characteristic of the Middle Stone Age, they reoccur. So you get these shaped artifacts again. This point I've shown to multiple professors of Stone Age archaeology, and independently they all assumed it came from Middle Stone Age layers, but it doesn't. And people start making these very large rectangular blades that we also know mainly from the Middle Stone Age. But here it does occur with the LSA. So the LSA stuff doesn't disappear, but it suggests that Middle Stone Age ways of doing things remain part of the repertoire, which is not weird in view of this timeline that I showed previously, where you get MSA assemblages made up to 26,000 years ago. Anyway, what explains this? Well, originally it was thought that the later Stone Age is this locking in of modern behavior, that modern humans finally become mentally modern as well, and they suddenly develop superior technology. Now, this doesn't hold up. We know that these complex behaviors are much older, that we see them already in the Middle Stone Age. And there doesn't seem to be a clear technological advantage to the later Stone Age. And it definitely doesn't happen suddenly in view of this diffused change. Now, then the other hypothesis is a population replacement, not of one species by another, but maybe of one population, one culture of people being replaced by a new culture. But especially the long drawn out character of the transition, it doesn't seem to work. So my idea is that what we are looking on is a reorganization of a lifestyle rather than a cognitive shift in human societies, that we see the concurrent changing of land use or territoriality, like how people move around their landscape. We see a change in the relative investment into different kinds of technology. And I think maybe we see a loosening of the cultural meaning of lithics, and an increase of more flexible napping strategies, just because there is no one size fits all way of napping that you can easily teach. And as an aside, this led me really down a rabbit hole. There is an interesting scientific literature on what is actually reverse engineering, and much of it is focusing on the Cold War, because to be proper reverse engineering, basically you need the Russians to find an American plane and sort of take it apart and copy it. But sometimes the Russians apparently just kind of got the general idea of a shape or of a kind of weapon, and then kind of improvised a similar solution themselves. And so the B-29 bomber and the Tupolev number 4, I am told, this is a clear example of proper reverse engineering. Anyway, with this, there are a lot of people to thank who made this research possible, and also you for sticking it out today. Thank you.
Gerrit, thank you very, very much for that. Yeah, just the articulation of it, the early part down to some of the more technical parts. I'm not too sure how some of us sort of laymen are feeling, but yeah, just intriguing in terms of understanding what has been happening here. Right on our doorstep, as it were. Folk, I think it's about 7 o'clock, am I right? have we got maybe one or two questions of a non-technical nature, just of sort of general interest? I mean, maybe I want to ask Gavin a question. It came up in a little interaction I had with him. I was asking if there was a way that I could have a look at some of the lithics from the rock shelter. And Gavin, how many boxes of lithics do you have? Yes. 80 boxes of lithics. So, I mean, there's a lot of material that you've worked with. I mean, just from a layman's point of view, that stuff stays here. It stays at the Peter Maritzburg Museum. And if I'm correct, Gerrit, you've actually come out to look at and re-engage some of that stuff as part of the ongoing research. All of it is, I'm imagining, digitally captured, so one's able to work with it in many different ways. But can I just check? Yeah, anyone want to? Yes, please.
So to start with the third question, definitely that would be very interesting. There is not, as we have seen it on the walls, really any art at Umhlatuzana, but this is not my specialty. There are other specialists also at the museum that know more about this. Then question one, burials. This is very frustrating in the Middle Stone Age. We have far more Neanderthal fossils in Europe than we have Homo sapiens fossils from the Middle Stone Age. You mentioned the border cave burial. Just last week, a paper was published by Dominic Stratford from WITS and Professor Grein that suggests that burial is not, as we archaeologists call, in situ. So it may not be an actual Middle Stone Age burial, but it may be younger. And it seems that in the Middle Stone Age, people are not disposing of their dead in the same way that we do. So we don't think they are burying the dead, or at least not regularly. The only place where we have early Homo sapiens cemeteries are a number of caves in the Near East called Skul and Kafse. But in Africa, there is one old burial in Kenya, in Pangaya Saidi, and then there is this interesting collection of fossils from Klaasi's River in the Western Cape, where we have anatomically modern humans, but they may have been cannibalized. So they show signs of burning and cut marks and a different ritual than what we are now used to. And so this rarity makes it very difficult to make regularities and thus make predictions. And now I must admit I've forgotten question number 2. Oh,
So we actually have a number of records in a reasonable number of records of sites in the area. The whole sort of wider Umhlatuzana area on in the south and in the upper museum. And many of them were produced by a resident of the area, Mike Moon, who retired at around age 40 and then spent much of his life thereafter recording archaeological sites. So we have a fair number of records from the Ingwe area at the Museum of Archaeological Sites, and many of them were recorded by a resident there, a long-time resident there, Mike Moon, who retired early at age 40 and then spent much of his life thereafter recording archaeological sites, mostly in areas that were being affected by development and sand mining and so on. And he would go around self-funding entirely, and he'd record, sometimes with the sort of authorities, permission of authorities, excavating and anyway collecting material, which is up at the museum. So we do have a number of records of the area at the museum. I'm not a faunal person. I'm not really. I think Gerrit knows more about that than me.
So one of the famous South African fossils, the Floresbad skull, it shows tooth puncture marks on the skull and sort of scoring marks. So that was definitely predated on by a leopard or a hyena. In the KwaZulu-Natal area, as far as I know, the bone assemblages do not have mini top predators. So we may, but generally in archaeological sites, carnivores are quite rare. So we may have 1 or 2 big cat bones at Sibudu Cave. What we would really like to find is a prehistoric hyena den. If I were to have to bet a bottle of wine for where will you find a human fossil, if we could excavate a hyena, then that would be my guess. I was the person who found the lithic in Haggard Road. When I first found the first one I found, I was struck by the fact that it's obviously an agate, which doesn't occur here. Subsequently, we have found another. What happened was we've had a approximately 200-meter long wall built, and so they did a trench about 1 meter deep, and these were thrown up, so there might be more. What is curious about them, they both have this scooping or whatever you call it, was the color of the rock. And when I showed it to Len, he said, I will bet that this rock came from the Kimberley area. So that's 1,000 miles from here. But certainly, if you'd like to see it, I have one in my... I do like these show and there's nothing like that occurring in this area. It's a very he said it was a blood brother of Tiger's Eye, which is an igneous rock. But they're both of this. So my question really was, were they likely to have transported stuff that far? So it's a beautiful stone, I must say. it doesn't surprise me that these materials are transported that far. Probably this is not kind of a logistical operation to get the best raw material. Probably these are gifts that are passed between people, that carry more meaning than just the functionality, and we well, as I showed that we know that ostrich eggshell beads move a long way, and there are other stones that move a long way, like the silkreed piece in that we found at Umhlatuzana. Similar stuff has been happening in Botswana, where silkreed is also transported over hundreds of kilometers. So I think we should basically, well, there is, I think, another thing that travels, and that is cultural information. So we see, for example, in the Stilbe period, the period of 70,000 years ago, that these bifacial points are similar across a super large area. So I think we should envisage really a set of interconnected communities from Atlantic to Indian Ocean already 70,000 years ago.
Can we take another, maybe 2 questions, and then let's pull it together? Yes.
I can hear you. Okay, this is a very technical question. I'll try to be quick. So we have radiocarbon dating that goes to 50,000 years ago. Before that, what we like to use here is optically stimulated luminescence, which basically represents sand grains catching the background radiation, background nuclear radiation that the Earth receives from the cosmos and from radioactive materials in the mantle. Now, when a sand grain is exposed to sunlight, the radiation that has accumulated escapes. So as long as the sand grain is on the surface, it doesn't accumulate a radioactive dose. But when it gets buried, it starts accumulating a radioactive dose. If you have a site like Umhlatuzana where you can measure the background radiation, and you can measure the dose, the radioactive dose that a sand grain has received, you can calculate how long ago the sand grain stopped being exposed to sunlight. And presumably the stone tools around there were buried at the same time. I hope this was semi-understandable and answers your question. Sorry? What do you do radiocarbon dating on? Well, the nice thing about radiocarbon dating is that you can use it on any organic material. So for example, at Border Cave, you could date the artifacts themselves. You can date human bones themselves. There are sometimes problems, but if you eat fish, there's too much old carbon in the sea, so you will be too old. So preferentially, what we use is charred seeds from or like plants that live for a single year, because then you don't have any distorting effects. If you date a tree, the tree may have been 400 years old by the time it was cut, and the date might be too old. I hope that answers the question.
Gerrit, if I may, when will you be back, and when does the next level of excavation begin?
So I've recently secured some funding, and now I need to reapply for an excavation permit to be allowed to excavate. But hopefully soon, because as this P3 phase, we have a small assemblage, and we need more information there, and we need more dates and stuff like that. So hopefully soon, but pending permits and funding and that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. Gerrit, just on behalf of us all, thank you very, very much, certainly from the local budding archaeologists here, and just for presenting and stimulating us in the way that you have. For those from the ArcSoc who probably feel a lot more comfortable with this material. Thank you too for coming and being with us this evening. We really, really appreciate it, and hoping too that this is part of an ongoing journey where we can somehow look at how we as emerging citizen scientists can perhaps find some ways of collaborating and supporting the work that you do. So, folk, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate your time here this evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, good, good. Exactly. Yeah.
If anyone's interested, I got lost on the travel. Call my mom, it's a cycle. She only hears from me on the come down. Traffic stops at a standstill. And I'm in my head and I'm out of your heart. When I'm off my face, I'm in the dark. If I'm up too high and you too far, would you write directions in the stars? When I'm gone, when I'm gone. Little fragmented memory. Scrape my knees on the concrete. It doesn't hurt too much, don't you worry. But someone else should take the car keys. When I'm in my head and I'm out of your heart. When I'm off my face and I'm in the dark. If I'm too high and I'm too far, would you write the stars? I'm going to please stone to savage. If I leave from ash, I say sorry. My